but we'll continue. Okay. So with today, I'll cover the first chapter of openEuler, and then we'll talk about the rest. Okay, so let me see my screen and then we can start. Okay, so welcome to openEuler. So again, what is openEuler? openEuler is Linux. It's similar to Ubuntu. Most of you guys are second year, third year. So you've heard about Linux and you've heard about Ubuntu, you've heard about CentOS, Red Hat, all these different operating systems. And most of them are proprietary. Like you have your Mac OS, which is proprietary and it's locked and you can't do any changes. You can't copy and clone it because it belongs to Apple. And then, so that is called closed source. And then you have open source, which is Ubuntu, Linux, CentOS, and Fedora, and many other things. So openEuler also is part of that family, part of the Debian family. And so openEuler allows you to, in a way, and be part of, the operating system, which is open source. Also, what they also have, they use openEuler. Huawei uses it in their data center, in their service, as part of that operating system, and that's the reason why you're here to learn about a computing environment, about this, and also just understand how to install it, how to use it, and how to understand operating systems from a open source perspective. So what we'll look at describing what is the GNU Free Software Foundation, the origin of Linux, as well as openEuler's operating system, and how to install it. I think in the next session, I'll show you how to install it. We'll run VirtualBox. We'll do the practical side of it, because that is how you will practice and understand and learn the commands, because there is commands that you will learn, which will be very important for the Huawei competition. When you go to these competitions, yes, you do the online preliminary rounds, which is where you just multiple choice questions and throw in false and all that. But when you get to the regional competition, which is now where you compete for South Africa against the Southern African region, which is against Kenya, against Morocco, against Nigeria, against Uganda, and there's many other countries, academies, then that's where there's a 4 hour kind of a practical round. And that's where you need to understand Linux, because they'll give you a task to do and you need to understand how to do it. Right. So that's a practical side of this. And that's very important. Yes, the recording, I'll say that's why I'm using Zoom. Not using the Huawei We Meeting platform or Teams. So I'll say the recording afterwards. I'll try to put it on a Google Drive for you in a folder, and then I'll say it then, and you can just go watch the sessions there in the recordings if you miss any sessions. Also, remember there is the online Huawei course also, where there's other instructors also when you go through the platform, and there's also videos of them that they present, and those are obviously pre-recorded videos, but it also helps you to get up to date with certain topics. When I cover something in a slide, you would have known already about it, and you've read about it or listened about it before. So yes, we'll see the recordings. So what is the objectives of today is to understand what open source is, understand, the GNU, the GNU stands for many things, right? Our government is a GNU, but it means it's basically this whole way of how everything comes together. So it's not an isolated kind of approach to it. It's where different parties, different vendors. So they call it GNU because you get software libraries, you get software itself, and you get operating systems, and they all come together and they share the same kind of mission and goal, vision and goal. And that's basically where the term GNU comes from. And then we look at the origin of Linux, the principle of Linux, as well as how to install it. And I think the install part will be step-by-step slides. However, like I said, I'm not going to cover today. I'll do it in our next session. Since it's long weekend, our next session will probably be Tuesday again, and not Monday. Monday is still a public holiday. So just keep that in mind. You have time then at least to prepare if you have time over the weekend. So let's look at Linux. Firstly, an operating system is a set of programs. What do we mean by that? It's all the different programs, your software, your system software, your programs, your libraries, all of that all together is that sets of programs, and all of that makes up an operating system. That allows you then to control your hardware as well as your software resources. And so again, what it allows you to do is have that convenient user interface that you can use to operate and use certain things. And that mainly is what an operating system is. Understanding the basic system software and how it allows you to do certain things. So Unix basically started in the 1960s. Sometimes you get these questions in MCQs, in multiple choice questions, when they ask you these questions. So just keep in mind, 1960s, the Bell Labs or MIT, they basically decided to join and create this Unix operating system. And then again, they started off with these type of hardware companies that went on. So HP and some Unix and all that, they all started at. However, moving on from that, we then had the GNU and open source come into play. And then the GNU decided to make things free for everyone, okay? And so they came up with these licenses. So when you go, I don't know if you've used GitHub before, but if you go on GitHub, you'll see these software licenses normally are tied to a project, and many softwares that you have, and you always have to have a license, right? And so these are different open source licenses that you see in front of you. We know the common GPL, and then there's also the BSD. You also have the MIT license. And so all of these licenses allows you to understand how you can reuse the software and update the software. So in most cases, you can't just take a software and redo it or reinstall it if the license don't provide it. So the licensing and the licensee basically provides that access for you to use that software. And so in most cases, we normally see the GPL license attached to software. And so the GPL is attached also to Linux. So that's why you can freely download Ubuntu and run it. And you could freely download this copy of openEuler, which is similar to that, and understand how that works. So if it's closed source, it won't obviously fall under this, like the Mac OS. But when you look at open source, these are all the license you will see. And you will see it also on software when you try to install software. So where it started, I mean, Linux started with something called Minix, which is obviously Andrew is Bomb, which obviously started this whole thing similar to Unix. They then decided to add certain things to it, which we know the famous guy called Linus Torvalds. He is the guy who started Linux. So they called him the father of Linux. And then he created this operating system and he called it free of charge. And that allowed people to multiply and update and actually add more code to it. So Linux was really small, very light, didn't have much to do. But then people came and they actually modified it and did some changes. And then so in 1994, the first Lionel 1.0 kernel was officially released. I think 1994 is a lot of things that happened in South Africa, so that's perfect for you to remember. If you need to think about it, and if you have to remember when the Linux kernel was released. And also, again, today we have many variations, right? We have Red Hat, which belongs to Red Hat. We have OpenSUSE, which belongs to another company, which is also open source. And we have the common Ubuntu, and then we have Deepin. Actually, Debian. I don't know why they call it Deepin, but probably translation from Chinese to English. And then again, when you look at the Linux distribution, it's the Linux kernel and then the software that comes with it. And that's how Linux works and how it's being produced. Now, when you look at the Linux releases, there's the kernel versions, and kernels always gets updated every 3 months or every 4 times during the year. They probably update the kernels for vulnerabilities and software patches and updates and major releases. And that's obviously important because it doesn't want to have software running in production and then it's unprotected or vulnerable, because you need to obviously update software many times, right? Nowadays, we have to do that. So again, when you look at the kernel version of openEuler, they released 20.0.3, which is the third version of 20. And then it's called LTS. Now, what LTS stands for is long-term support, means that it can support the software for up to 5 years for its lifetime of that version of the software. So if you have 20.03, you can use that software for 5 years or 10 years. And then later on in the 5th year, they'll update a new version, 20.1, but you could still use 20.03. So that's kind of what LTS means when you look at software versions, especially in Linux. And so again, those are how you look at a kernel version, which is obviously 4.9. And nowadays we have 5 or we have 6. We already at 6 kernel, the kernel version, because it keeps on being updated. And it will always increment as you update more things and so forth. So you have commercial distros and you have community distros. Commercial distros are normally maintained by companies and they charge you, like Red Hat, Linux, they would charge you as a subscription to use that Linux because you have to pay every month or every year to make sure that their patches are enterprise ready and protected for your company. And so that is why people normally have to understand that, yes, it's open source to run something, but you also have commercial and community distros. And then obviously the community ones is free of charge, which you can run anywhere and anytime and on any PC. So what is openEuler? openEuler is free. It's an open source OS operated by the openEuler community, which is a community that basically just do all the updates to that free operating system for everyone. It's based on Linux, and again, it supports Kunpeng. Now, what is Kunpeng? You'll hear about the term Kunpeng because Kunpeng is also part of the Huawei competition. So later on during the year, after we've gone through openEuler, we've gone through, I think there's another course we are supposed to do as part of operating systems, and then there's Kunpeng. Kunpeng is just the CPU processor that the Chinese use and their operating system. But also we have Intel and we have AMD and we have ARM. So we have different type of processors, but Kunpeng is obviously what works best for the server platform. And that's what Huawei uses. That's why we hear the term Kunpeng. And don't be afraid of asking me questions, but I think Kunpeng is just to tell you that it's a CPU that they use. So again, when you look at Kunpeng and other processors, it allows the way openEuler runs, it runs based on servers. That's basically it. And so it's stable, efficient, it's sustainable open source OS, and it's made for your databases. So if you run a database, a MySQL database, openEuler would be a perfect operating system for that. If you run big data, cloud computing, or even AI scenarios, it's a perfect operating system for that. People normally believe Ubuntu is perfect. Yes, it is. But if you talk about, in this case now, in our course that we're looking at openEuler now. We're not looking at the Ubuntu version, although they both in similar. There is a similarity between the two. I think openEuler uses the Fedora approach, so you'll hear about that later on. It's a different approach to how you run things. So again, there's two types of releases of openEuler. You have the innovation release, which is the ones that always gets updated every half of the year. So those ones are for testing. People want to test the operating system. Then they'll keep on updating and trying different versions. But then you have the long-term support, as I mentioned earlier. Those are mainly where you can get a new version released every 2 years, or you can keep it up to 5 years or even longer, depending on how well you trust the operating system. So that is introduction to OS. Now, openEuler, if you install it, like I said, you can use Oracle VirtualBox, which is much easier to do it. If you have VMware, you can use VMware to install it, or you could use install it bare metal. So what I mean by bare metal is you could take a USB stick, make it bootable using a tool called Rufus, and then you could partition your drive to have 2 partitions, right? And then you could keep Windows on the one partition, and you install openEuler on the other partition. And that would be a bare metal approach. But I think for safety reasons, you don't want to format your drive because you might, do the wrong thing. So you don't want to go that risky route, but that's a way to do it. But it can affect your bootloader. I would suggest rather use the VirtualBox route. We're also going to I'm going to try to see if I can get your cloud virtual machine. I'll see if I can speak to Huawei about that so that you can practice that also via the cloud instead of running it on your PC, which could use more resources because you have to share your memory and your hard disk and your RAM, sorry, and your CPU to run that virtual machine. And that's basically how you use it. So openEuler can be installed on ARM. ARM is a architecture of a type of computing platform. So like in my case, I run a Mac, so it's an ARM CPU. And then you have x86, which is more Intel based, which is like your Intel i7, i5, and those ones, they would probably run that. So you can install it on both that architectures. That's the nice thing about it. It basically comes in an ISO file, which you can download from the openEuler community. So you go to the website, you download from there. And then there's obviously different versions. I think we now at version 24, but we'll see which one we'll look at when we do the course. Because it's important that we prepare you for a competition type version that they will use during the competition. So again, when you look at openEuler, it supports different installations. As I said, you can install via USB, via CD-ROM, or via a virtual CD-ROM drive. And that's basically when you attach it to a server or to a VM, as I said in earlier. When you install it, you can configure it firsthand. So you can configure the installation language, the location where you want to install it, the type of software you want to add, the host name and the network configuration, all those things you can all configure on openEuler. And it's similar to how you would install CentOS, which is a similar operating system. CentOS is just a free version of Red Hat. The XF Rocket 9 also is a different one. And then after that, your installation will be complete, and then you would have installed openEuler. That's the first part of installing it. Now, the tricky part there is you need to make sure that you know your amount of memory you have available, your CPU, how many cores you have. If you have 4 cores, you might have to say 1 core, and then you would have remaining 3 cores running for your main operating system. So just keep that in mind. And also you have to just check that you have enough drive space for installing it. So this is basically how it works. After you put in your USB stick or your CD-ROM or your virtual CD-ROM, you will get this menu popping up. In this case here, we have 20.03 LTS. It could be different from your version that you want to install. You would then basically say directly install to the system because you want to install it. Unless you want to check the software package, then you use the second option, which is this one. And if you failed to do something before and your system crashed, you can go into the troubleshooting mode. But for now, if you look at the first part when you install it, you say install openEuler, and then that installation done. Now for the competition, they will have this already for you pre-made. So the the openEuler will already be there running. Users need to log in, and users need to understand how the commands work. That's pretty much it. The installation part, I don't think they'll ask to install it, but it's out to understand how to practice and install it. So after you've done that, then you get to this next window, right? This window again will show you your language, and you will obviously choose English. Then you go into the next window. That's where you now have to select. This is the part where you have to select your software. So first of all, you want to make sure that your time zone is right. You are in South Africa, so your time zone should be Africa, either Durban or Johannesburg. Because you don't want to have a wrong time zone on your server because you could get the wrong date stamps when you look at running certain things. You need to make sure that that changes to Africa's time zone. You also can select the software type. So in this case here, we'll say minimal install. We're not installing any add-on services. So in this case, you would have the minimal settings. And then lastly, what you want to do is you want to obviously select the network host name, because you need to give obviously the VM a name, and then also you need to enable the network card. After that, this will go gray, and you can then begin to install and do the installation. So when you look at this again, you first have to select the disk where your OS will be installed. And so normally I would say 20 gig 20 gig disk space is fine because you're just doing a practice. And then you obviously, it will basically format that disk in many cases. You could manually set up in the beginning, but we're not going to get that. I think rather just create a user 20 gig disk space. The system itself will convert that for you when it does the installation. Then you choose the type of installation option, right? So I said minimum earlier because you don't want to install other things. But let's say you want to install openEuler for a server. Then you would select the server options and it will install all the other information regarding a server, the web server, a file server, a mail server, a proxy server, whatever server roles are there, it will install that particular things that you select. And then obviously hypervisor it will install only, make sure that the VM is set for a hypervisor scenario. And in most cases, that is in the data center that they would install that particular operating system to be an hypervisor. And then you would just use it to compute and run as compute, like for AI, and so forth. So that's basically what you would look at. After you've done that, then you would get to the next stage, which is now configuring the username and the password. So when you configure the username and the password, you have to configure your root password. Normally, this is given to you during the exams. You don't have that, and you need that. And then also the user creation, that will be there also for you. But for practice reasons, you would want to create that, and just remember that. After that's done, you would then obviously now log into openEuler. You will have two things that you will look at. You will look at the Linux graphical user interface, or you will either use the Linux command line interface. But if you install the older version of openEuler, you only get the CLI. There won't be a GUI. So you need to make sure that you at least install something higher than that if you want to see the graphical user interface. So when you log in, you can log in also via local login like username and password. Normally what Linux allows you to do is you can run many sessions. If you have many users, you can run many virtual consoles to log in. That's what it does. And you can then remote login also if you need to. So again, this is just an example to show you what shell is. So what shell is basically if you're in your console, you will learn about the command line interface. And this is basically the shell that you will work in. In most server and data centers, they use the console. The graphical user interface falls away because it's overhead and it can slow down your server. So normally you would have this shell, look at this. It can be bash, it can be sh, it can be chs, or it could be ksh. So you have different type of shells, and those are how the Linux operating systems work. You have it in Windows also. Windows, it's called PowerShell, and PowerShell is similar to any other shell in this cases. So PowerShell is in Windows by default, and that would give you the same type of commands. Not the same as in Linux, but some commands might be the same. So when you look at this here, the user's trying to log in here, and obviously the user's trying also to see how to get into the operating system in this case. So here you will see the system prompt here is the user at the hostname, and this is normally when you SSH. So it would be the user at the hostname, whatever the IP address of the hostname, and then that allows you then to log in. But what you also notice is that there is a hash symbol when you're the root user. And when you're the normal user, you will have the @ symbol. So that tells you the roles of how Linux is defined. Like in Windows, you would have your administrator, and then you would have now other users also. So that is basically the same role with regards to that. So root is administrator, as in for Windows, and then you have your normal users, which is just the user. You could also change your password. So in Linux, in the shell command, you can type the word password. So it's not the word password, type PASSWD, and that means that you can change the current user's password. Now, if you can see here, you logged in as root and you have the hash symbol, which means you have root privileges. But if you were in the normal user, you would have the @ symbol. And then again, that would be maybe the user. Let's make an example here. I have my cursor here. And then what you would see here, you would maybe have to type sudo, which is the word for super administrator. And then you would type password. So you would type that password, D, and then that will now allow you to change your user's password. But currently you have the root user, so it's assuming that you're changing the root password. If you had to type next to password and you say the user next to it, which is maybe whatever the username is, then it will change that user's password with the root privileges. So that's kind of how the console works in that sense. You can also look at other Linux users. As I said, you have the root user, which is mainly the special administrator, as I mentioned. And it's the root user is similar to a super administrator. You can do many things. And like I said, I made an example of the administrator in Windows. And so it has the highest privileges of that operating system. So you really don't want to spread around the root password. Otherwise, someone can get in and then just delete some files on your server. So again, when you want to change users, use the command su. So you go in, you type, let's say you have the symbol here, which is root. And so then you would say su, and then you would say the username. So let's say the username is, I don't know, student. Okay. Then that will allow you to log into student. So to switch user. So SU stands for switch user. Okay. So you switch from root to another user, and that is how you use that command. And so after that's done, you would then be logged in as that user. So there's other shortcuts also. So like I said, this is an introduction to openEuler. It will get more practical as we continue. Other commands is tab on your keyboard if you want to skip spaces. There's the history command to see previous history commands you've done. And there's also other commands that you can use on your keyboard. And that is basically the introduction of openEuler I want to talk about today. As I said, it's more about understanding how to use this type of shell command terminal. And then as you understand it better, the practical side will come into play and you will really understand the big picture around it. It also helps you prepare yourself for a data center, because in data centers, if you go to AWS, if you go to Azure, if you go to any company in the world, they all use Linux. No one really hardly uses Windows, because Windows have a lot of threats and attacks on it, and exe attacks. And so again, that's why I think this is a good thing for you. While you're still finding your feet in the industry, you'll know at least what you do here in Linux can be applied to any particular Linux environment somewhere else. And that's basically why we're doing this competition. So again, when you look at the scores here, it's asking you, you do not need to specify a password of the root user during the openEuler OS installation. However, you must specify the password of the root user when logging. And that is false. Remember, I said earlier, you need to put a password in. When we look at that first command here, you need to specify the root password. Otherwise, it won't allow you to continue. Otherwise, it's going to just stay there and wait. Sometimes they've changed this, they have override, but you need to set the root password. Otherwise, it will just stay there and wait for you till you put it in. Okay. And then the next quiz was, which of the following keys can be used to quickly supplement commands and parameters? So if you want to supplement commands, like it's probably the up and down keys, because you want to switch between different commands and parameters, so you can use that keys to change between commands and that. And so again, that is the introduction to openEuler and how it works. So again, I'm just going to quickly share the competition part. Just stop sharing that. If there's any questions, let me know. Like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time today. There's an introduction to everything. But just to give you an idea of what this whole openEuler is about and how it works. I'm just going to say something with you on the incentives. I think the incentives, I think the incentives was explained to you. But just to tell you basically, so when you pass the, let's say the HCIA openEuler exam, right? And you must be active student because they'll look at the active rate of 75% at the end of the class as we continue, okay? So when you look at it, I think you as a student, I think you get 1,000 rand if I'm not mistaken. That's if you pass the HCIA. And I think when we get later on to the HCIP, which is higher, then I think it's 10,000 rand if I'm not mistaken. But I think that is the incentives that's available to you as students. Also, it all depends on how you go through the course and also doing the mock exam, because there's also a mock exam that we'll do. So I'm just trying to see if I can just log into the platform quickly and then just show you how you can use it. All right, so let me just log in quickly. Let's see my screen now. Okay, while it's loading, there we go. So what you'll notice is that yes, the competition is gonna obviously be now again already, but I think what I want to show you, just go there. This is the course academy, okay? So what you'll see is that we have, obviously, we're going through a professional course now, which is basically what we're looking at. The general courses is those open source courses that you can do, which is called micro certifications. And so what you can do with that is you can do those courses, pass the course, get the badge, post it on LinkedIn through Credly. Credly is it's a platform that Huawei uses to showcase your work, and then you can show that you've completed the course, and those are those smaller courses. When you look at the curriculum overmap that if you look at now, you have all these different things that's happening out there. But I think what we're looking at here and where we at now, we're here at operating systems. So we're basically here with operating systems. So we fall under cloud and computing, right? It's cloud and computing, although normally we would say cloud computing. So we fall under that. The cloud guys would obviously fall under principles of cloud computing, data storage, and AI. However, we interlean between the two. So we learn about AI also because they would use an AI on the operating system. And there's the storage side also of it. So you're not alone when you look at the way you've chosen this track. There's an overlap between the two. So keep that in mind. And as you can see, there's a certification associated with the course we're doing. So again, when you look at it, these are the general courses. And again, those are self-study. And so you see that that's where we call it the micro certification. So if you look at the study parts, right? So you've chosen computing. So you're obviously here by openEuler, right? Understanding the basic hardware and software, and then also, get to know AI. So you are not far off from the AI track, right? Remember, there's a cloud computing track, there's a datacom track, and then there's the computing track. You're actually in line with the AI part. So it's part of that, but we need to get to the operating system foundations before we get further than that. And that's why you need to understand openEuler before we go to Kunpeng and obviously AI, which is a different track. Again, that's where we're at. And so you basically now going through this course here, HCIA openEuler, and you need to pass that to get your certification exam, which is where I spoke about the 1,000 rand. When you look at it in a high overview, obviously these are just showing you the different courses and the general courses and obviously where each of them fit in. So when you look at it from a certification perspective, you would see that openEuler falls somewhere under computing. It's still part of computing, but it's somewhere at the bottom still here. There is at openEuler. So we'll do the openEuler, which is version 1. And if you pause that or we go to the next phase, we'll do the HIP openEuler, which is higher. Now, the HIP is to prepare you for the regional exam, because during the regional, they'll focus on HIP Linux, right? openEuler. And that's where you have to be really good at what you're doing. During I think when you pass the regional and you go to the global one in China, that's where they'll focus on HAIE. So the way the competition works is the levels of how you increment, obviously, how you look at a qualification, that's how each track is designed. So by understanding HIA, it will get you through to the nationals. Understanding HIP gets you to understand how to pass the regionals. And so that is basically how we look at it from that perspective. So there's the competition that I'm talking about, the practice competition. You have 3 tracks, and obviously we have looked at it. We're looking at the computing track now. And so when you look at a computing track, these are the courses. Let me just go to study. This is still the old one I'm opening. But these are the courses that that will go through. So yeah, it's a 6 months journey. I think the aim of this is it's still June, if I'm not mistaken. No, I think it's June. I think it's October, around about that time, but we'll see. But you'll do in different phases. So when you look at the course content here, let's just go to exam outline. And I'll share this link with you if you don't have this link. I'm sure you should have this link. I think because it's close, I have to enroll. Hopefully I can enroll still. Okay, so when you look at the outline, this is basically, try to make it bigger now. So you can see here, you will do the 90 minutes, the exam during the 90 minutes. That's obviously understanding the knowledge of what is openEuler. And you can see here, it's about openEuler, OpenGAS. That's the database. So we'll still go through HI OpenGAS, which is basically Huawei's open source database. And then we'll look at Kunpeng, right, which is their architecture. Yeah. And so again, those are those type of questions that you'll get. Then during the national stage, as I said, you might do the HIP, and that's where they'll ask you those type of questions. So we'll have to prepare you for that. And then, like I said, the UniPortal account is the account that you log in through the Huawei when you registered you. When you look at the regional states, that's now where the HIE, no, not yet. This is still HIP, but this is where they'll break you into teams. So now you've gone through the process. Now you have to get through regional states, and that's where you do the lab of 4 hours that I mentioned earlier. That lab is where you'll be 3 students. One will be doing openEuler, one will be the OpenGAS, one will be using Kunpeng, right? The architecture. And you guys have to work together as a team. If one member of the team fails the other member, you all 3 lose out on the round. So it's not that it's going to be a selected team. The Huawei normally looks at the high scoring. So whatever you achieve in the national and in the first round, that scoring gets added, and then they choose the top 3, right? Nationally, and regionally. And then based on that, you get selected as that top 3 as a team. Then that team, so you can be many teams, right? But as long as you're in that top, I think they have top 30 or something, because they break them all out into 3 people in a team. When that's done, then you obviously get to go to the global stage, which is then 8 hours long. And I can tell you now, 8 hours long is a whole day, because you have to go and prepare. You have to make sure you don't eat the wrong food the previous day, because you don't want to have a runny tummy during that 8 hours. Then you're going to have to forfeit. So again, that's the important concept around that. Then if you look at the weighting, you have openEuler, you have OpenGAS, and you have Kunpeng, which is application development. So that's the part where I said it's really a small feature that's added. It counts about 20%, right? But it's not needed now in your first 2 stages or rounds when you do that. Remember, your first round you're going to do by October. This stage here, we normally do October, November. Then the national stage is normally in February, the following year, 2026. And then your regional stage is during April. No, before April. I think it's March. And then your global stage is in May. So that's how the competition is spread around. Okay. So you basically have to focus 50% on openEuler for the exam, and then 50% on OpenGoals, which is basically the database. So we'll go through those two. And in the national stage, the same. And in the regional stage, this is where they'll prepare you for the 20% for Kunpeng application development. And then obviously there's the contents again, how you will be tested. So again, when you look at it, it's focused on openEuler, GAS, Kunpeng application development, but not limited to the development. So we're not looking at basic stuff and stuff like that, right? But we'll get to that because you understand the operating system better if you understand those services. So here's how it will look at when you look at the document. Basic principles in the first stage, so that's fine. But you also notice here that as you go to the national stage, they add more things. So in the regional stage, or sorry, the first stage, you only have to understand up to security and performance monitoring, right? There's nothing more than that. And then maybe ecosystem, which is on OpenGoals, and that's all you need to understand. So they list there the things that we have to look at. Okay. And then after that, you will see how each round just increments and climbs. So you'll see that if you look at HCIE or the regional round, it's more focused on more topics, and that's obviously how the rounds is calculated. But we'll go through these, each of these we'll cover, right? And that's basically how the exam is set up, yeah, in a nutshell, and what we're preparing you for this year. All right, so with that, I'll stop the recording now.